Welcome to the Proto-Future podcast, a podcast where I reinvent journalism from first principles and come to realize why newsrooms have multiple people on staff. This is Proto-Future Bonus 2, episode Catchup, Madison Takedown. As I edit my way through the final installment of the Borealis series, I am hopelessly behind schedule. It started at a 1-ish week turnaround, moved to 2, then 3, and now well over 4. This is genuinely one of the most difficult and time-consuming things I've ever set myself to, and I'm a PhD student. Whereas I found it possible to churn out a topical, thorough essay every month, as you can hopefully see, this particular series has left me completely overwhelmed. I've made the tough decision to take a month off from the main episodes to finish editing Borealis Part 4, and instead replace it with this extended housekeeping and bonus essay. That should give me enough time to both finish editing this episode in time for next month, and hopefully get ahead. I also know that this entire series has been a bit light on the model railroading side of things, but never you fear, we will get back to that soon enough. I think I'll do maybe 2 BGT episodes in a row to rebalance the scales. Through all of this, I've barely gone in the train room since May, despite it being September. Like I said, I'm no longer a model railroader, and I'm now a model podcaster, something which I do think will make my content suffer. I am all too aware of the Stephen King effect, wherein once you make it big, you lose out on the workaday touchstones that made you famous to begin with. When they started, Preston and Child were describing the back hallways of museums and homelessness in tunnels. Then they moved on to obscure seashore intellectual institutes and Bitcoin mining operations. Now, the most recent book of theirs I read, I described to my family as Pendergast Retires to Florida, a fact made all the more painful by my great-great-great-granduncle being Maurice Prendergast, the inspiration for the character's name. I am acutely aware that if I keep this up, I will soon no longer be a podcast about model railroading, but more a podcast about podcasting. So if I'm to make any progress on the ideas which made this a thing to begin with, I need to get back to modeling, and to do that, I have to catch up on editing. While I joked last time, someday, if I do make enough Patreon money, I can hire an editor and do many more of these crazy adventures and possibly sustainably boost my production schedule. But for the moment, it's just me, and I'm grateful to the patrons that I have in helping me offset the surprisingly heavy burden of website hosting. But there is one unresolved issue you may be curious of. What was it that caused me to be delayed for this episode, but not quite the other 3? Well, one answer is that, at the recommendation of other podcasters, I've finally moved over from GarageBand to Audacity. As I detailed in my Patreon production blog, Borealis 2 was all sufficiently exported and done to find 2 massive 45 or more minute segments in the middle that had been deleted to silence. I think it may have had something to do with the mere trillion edits per episode this particular series requires, but I needed to completely re-edit a third of the episode from scratch. Yuck. Borealis 3 therefore necessitated a delay from trying to learn a completely new-to-me DAW software. That also took a while, and I found that, unless you have RAM enough to make a gaming computer blush, editing the entire podcast with said trillion edits all in one go would result in my laptop reverting to a puddle of molten aluminum. So it takes significantly longer, needing to render partial episodes almost a dozen times over the course of editing, but at least it doesn't auto-delete my progress now, so I guess that's improvement. All of these have added to the production process, but the thing that really set me back this month was work. A major conference in my field is the Molecular Genetics of Bacteria and Phages meeting at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, commonly known as Phages. I had been pining to attend this conference a second time since January, but due to the particular difficulty of my project and the experiments assigned to me, the progress I intended to make instead resulted in expensive and time-consuming failures. I have my own gripes with this because I think the experiments are unfalsifiable, but as far as the conference goes, I had little data to put together into a poster. For the few months leading up to the conference, I had a surprising amount of travel previously arranged, fully independently of each other and largely coalescing in a certain time period more through happenstance than anything. Even though most of these trips were over the weekend, anybody familiar with science knows it to be a 7-day-a-week job. But to produce enough data for the poster, I had to work my ass off in lab. To reconcile these contradictory goals, in the 2 months leading up to the conference, I ended up working over 10 hours a day 14 times, with several days exceeding 15 hours, and my peak being 35 hours of work in just 3 days. So, in effect, for the 2 weeks leading up to the conference and the week of the conference itself, time I would have normally spent in the mad dash to edit the Borealis series, I instead was doing science. The poster turned out fine and got more traction than I was expecting, and I otherwise had a lovely time, but I'm now irreparably behind my podcasting schedule. That and some more technical difficulties I'll explain in the episode's housekeeping, and there was no chance of me catching up no matter how much I worked. Hence, I'm here, on this apology tour. While I can't provide you a full episode this month, I can advance a few themes I've been bandying about. I've frankly reached the point where my ability to produce episode ideas has far outpaced my ability to evince them, so at some point between now and the heat death of the universe, you'll get a full episode explaining my thoughts on cities and how they relate to me, model railroading, and this podcast, but for the moment, I thought I'd give you a more specific teaser with respect to Madison, Wisconsin itself, plus a bit on bicycling. I had been to Madison twice before, first passing through on a motorcycle on my Iron Butt trip to the AML picnic last year, and second to the Phages conference the year before. That time preceding, due to quirks of airplane ticket cheapness, I arrived the weekend prior to the conference and, without using any university money, got a hotel room so that I could pre-game the conference and sufficiently explore the city-lit. Using the local B-Cycle bike share, in that day and a half, I rented a bicycle and circumnavigated Lakes Mendota, Monona, and Wingra. I also managed to visit most every major-ish museum there, the highlights being the Museum of Contemporary Art and the National Mustard Museum in Middleton, Wisconsin. Okay, as much as I joke, it was actually a pretty not-awful museum, and I did buy and bicycle back a metric fuckton of mustard for holiday gifts, some for myself and some of which I still have. Their honey mustards were creative, if abrasive, but I was solidly pleased by the Dusseldorf-style creamy mustard. But for this year, the plane tickets worked out that the cheapest option for the taxpayer was to send me there both the weekend before and the weekend after. And by worked out, I mean didn't work at all. Despite my being an incredibly accomplished traveler with TSA PreCheck and global entry, American bumped my tickets to make way for higher status members and asked me to pay for an upgrade on an itinerary with a 16-hour delay. My average speed between State College and my Detroit layover was 11 miles per hour. I literally could have bicycled faster. From a careful review of publicly available FAA data, American has the most involuntarily discharged passengers of any major airline, as well as the most delays, so it's not just my opinion or standalone experience. You should absolutely never fly American Airlines, as it, like its namesake country, is unwoke, as evidenced by the over $1,000 extra I am in the hole for paying for tickets which I already purchased. In the words of View from the Wing, American Airlines puts the customer last. But, after the most heinous travel experience of my life, I had 2 weekends, well, 1.5, to explore Madison. But having already effectively completed Madison last year, that's too much time for not enough stuff to do. How was I to occupy myself this round? Now we get into stuff that will really only make sense in, about 10 to 30 months. One of the aspects of my life which I have yet to touch on is the complete abrogation of automobile usage in my day-to-day to reduce my carbon footprint. And if I haven't made it clear before, the private automobiles of just Texas are responsible for 0.5% of all planetary carbon emissions, and if just SUVs alone, no other type of car or truck were their own country, they would be the 6th largest polluting nation in all of human history. Cars are fundamentally unwoke, and if you want a next generation of model railroaders, it behooves you to stop driving so that there is, a next generation at all. Anyway, I do ride my bicycle every day and many nights for commuting, and I have the lovely detachable basket aforementioned in episode 4 for errands, so I effectively never use my car for errands on a daily basis. However, if I want to ride my bicycle for a longer leisure ride or bike packing trip on the weekend, I'm stumped, because there are no trains or reliable buses in any bicycling distance, and the only vehicle that can fit my bicycle is a car. As someone who wants to sell their car forever for purely ideological reasons, how do I resolve this incompatibility? With the folding bicycle, of course. Reliable folding bicycles have been around for nearly 60 years at this point, and the ability to pack their frame into little more than the size of their smaller-than-standard wheels is quite appealing. Much as with my current bicycle, I was initially agnostic as to whether I wanted an electric or acoustic folding bike, but extensive, obsessive, research resulted in settling on the Turn Vectron, a folding e-bike with not too small tires and superior amenities, cargo capacity, and versatility. However, the nearest Turn dealer is almost 3 hours away, and the nearest with a Vectron S10 in stock is well over 4. As you may hear on an episode some point approximately around my retirement, I went to Pittsburgh, test rode a sister bicycle, and found it to be quite satisfactory, but learned that the company was back-ordered by at least 4 months on the model I was looking for, so I couldn't even buy it off the internet and ship it directly to myself from the manufacturer. Enter Madison. Knowing that I was going to be there for 9 days, and wanting to take longer bicycle rides into the wilderness, I had looked into renting a non-bike share bike, but that would have put me well into the hundreds of dollars for the trip. On a whim, I emailed all the local bicycle shops, asking if they had this particular make and model in stock, and wouldn't it be my luck that the one bicycle shop in the old Milwaukee Road Depot, Motorless Motion, or MOMO, ironic given that I was buying an e-bike which does in fact have a motor, if pedal-assisted, had a single Vectron S10 left in stock. Props to Kevin for his superb service and patience with my wackadoo-ness, but on the very first day in Madison, I popped down to MOMO, bought myself the bike, and put a metric century on it before midnight. In my time there, I bicycled to McFarland, Mount Horeb, Paoli, and New Glarus. By the time I had the folding bike shipped back to me for a much more nominal fee than a regular bicycle, because it can fold, I had nearly 400 kilometers on the odometer. So, with all of my explorations of Madison, what do I think of it? Strap in. Well, for a long time and from many people, I had been hearing that Madison was an up-and-coming hip place, a Denver of the Midwest, a destination for the young, unattached, and tech-savvy. I can say that, while the reputation is not entirely untrue, Madison is the embodiment of the phrase, beauty is only skin-deep. It has an absolutely gorgeous downtown, the Isthmus it's called, with very cute buildings surrounding the Wisconsin state capitol and in the vicinity of State Street, but it rapidly crumples into single-family housing, with the majority of the land area of the city being a Strody Anywhere USA, completely indistinguishable from most other places. Hell, in an act of zoning malpractice, there are even a few single-family homes just mere blocks from the Capitol building. Its aptitudes are a very few, very close-in, Instagrammable neighborhoods, but not really much else beyond that. The Isthmus is so named because it's a 1x4 mile stretch of land between two lakes, Mendota and Monona, iconic to the identity of the city. However, unlike neighboring Minneapolis, which, as I found, has 100% of all lake and riverfronts as parkland and greenways reserved for public use, the incredible conservatism of Wisconsin has turned nearly all of both lakefronts over to mansion backyards, with what little public space left to the lakeside parks being dreadfully cramped and overcrowded from lack of capacity. It also does have a remarkable network of bicycle trails, low-traffic bicycle boulevards, and even a few protected cycle tracks. But, and you literally can't make this up, I overheard an undergrad in the Memorial Student Union saying, "It's very bikeable, but it's not bike-friendly. It's not Amsterdam." While there are a few, basically only 3, reliable bicycle routes in and around the Isthmus, once you've left, most trips have you out of luck and in the same lanes as incredibly hostile drivers. There are a larger-than-average number of rail trails stretching up to 85 miles away or down across the Illinois border, and the Velo Underground is a fantastic nation-leading piece of bicycle infrastructure. However, that in 8 hours I counted almost a dozen hostile drivers honking or yelling at other bicyclists or myself just at road trail intersections means that the bicycling culture is, if marginally larger, still absolutely subservient to high-speed vehicularly homicidal living rooms on wheels. I get the impression that Madison is less a bicycle-friendly place, and instead a place that makes bicycle trails more out of a sense of decoration, not because they're intending to change the world or their corner of it, but because hip cities have cycle tracks, and they think themselves to be hip. As far as transit goes, they are finally gearing up to run a bus rapid transit system, but they are so late to the game that the BRT fad is almost over and the pendulum is rightfully swinging back to rail. Don't get me wrong, it's always nice to have reliable bus transit with frequencies no less than every 15 minutes, but that should be the standard baseline for any bus route, not your flagship transit offering. BRT is extremely expensive for what you get, preternaturally fragile to reversion to automobilic tyranny, more expensive to run and maintain, and almost always lower ridership than equivalent rail corridors, so you end up getting fewer riders at a higher subsidy each. It's nice that they're making a BRT route, but this is a basic project that should have been done a decade ago. And outside the isthmus near my hotel, literally only 4 miles from the state capital, bus routes collapsed into hourly or worse headways. The few buses there are to the exurbs were supplemented by pulse chase scheduling, allowing timed transfers at distal miniature transit centers, but to quote Jeremy Clarkson, this is a brilliant solution to a problem that never should have existed in the first place. And now we get to the big one, intercity transit. At risk of telling the same Scott Walker story over and over again, they had the train sets, they were already built in Badger State colors and ready to go on existing rails. But then the dingalings in Stevens Point and Green Bay and Ironwood and Sheboygan decided that they don't want Madison to have a choo-choo. Despite the city being innervated with a half-dozen different rail lines, many of which are underutilized and run right into downtown, and over a dozen different convenient locations for an intercity multimodal transit center being ripe for the picking, the nearest Amtrak station is 35 miles away in Columbus, Wisconsin. Even if Madison was the perfect city, everyone wants to travel every now and again. Unfortunately, Madison is not the perfect city. My lab determined that, despite Madison being 4.5 times larger in population than State College, it feels like it has less than 4.5 times the amount of stuff to do, so the need to visit other places conveniently is especially important for Madison. But with no rail option, my only alternatives are climate arson by lard barge car, wallet arson by plane, slow, infrequent, unreliable, and uncomfortable intercity buses, or literally bicycling to the state of Illinois. To live in Madison is to be marooned. The Scott Walker saga actually relates to a larger point. Madison seems to have the same blue town, red state divide as several other predominantly conservative states, and Austin was brought up multiple times whilst I was there. State legislators from faraway Eau Claire or Oshkosh can hate big city life and liberalism, but while they can ignore Milwaukee, they have to go to Madison. They come in, see a city enriched in the queers, and it riles up their small-town Americana traditionalism, and they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to make the city less queer. What? The gays want more library funding? Well, tough luck, we won't give it to them. What? The gays want the police to stop killing unarmed black civilians? We'll prevent them from wearing body cameras, because we sure wouldn't want city or state employees to be accountable for their heinous actions. As observed by the intentionally unnamed person in Borealis 2, Wisconsin is the most racist state in the Union, and no matter how much Madison might want to pretend that it's not that way, you really can't escape that culture while you're there. And unfortunately, that culture has disproportionately gerrymandered power. As someone who's considering moving anywhere in the country, or frankly the world, I am fundamentally baffled by how Madison has been able to earn its hipster reputation. Having now been to all of them back-to-back this summer, I can't for the life of me figure out anything that Madison does that Minneapolis doesn't do better, or that would be so incredible and unique as to peel people away from Chicago, much less be so much more incredible and unique as to make up for the hatred and legislative malfeasance its home state lobs at it. Part of why I'm so hard on Madison is because it is so tantalizingly close to being a place deserving of its reputation. It does have gorgeous lakes, it does have many incredible bicycle paths, it does have lovely restaurants, lounges, and festivals, and it is actively working to improve them all. But it feels like there's no momentum to improve the inescapable irritations and very serious flaws of living there, such as the transportational isolation within the state, the car-oriented stroads running right up to the capital, and the severe lack of anything to do in your free time that isn't going and getting blackout drunk like an undergrad. It feels like the good parts of Madison were honestly just lucked into, and that it's not a paragon of urbanism, but rather a discount local urbanism for people that really want to move to Minneapolis, but need to stay within a few hours' drive of their family in Kronenwetter. In many ways, the sense I got is that the residents there are very inward-facing, not particularly open to new ideas, and absolutely convinced that Madison is the neatest place on earth and that they don't need to pay attention to anywhere else. In essence, they're small-town Wisconsin-pilled. But I think the city could stand a hit to its pride and a realization that, as good as it may already be, there's still a lot left to do, and it would seriously benefit to look at other cities, nearby and around the country, both as a source of competition for young tax dollars and as a source of inspiration for new and transformative ideas that could be used to make Madison better than everyone says it is. It would definitely be an upgrade from where I'm living right now, but only barely. If I'm open to moving 700 miles away to Madison, I'd also be open to moving 900 miles away to Minneapolis, and I think, at this moment, I'd get a much better experience for it. This has been episode Fuck You, I'm Busy, bonus 2 of the Proto-Future podcast, episode Catchup and Madison Takedown. The theme music is Spark of Life by Benjamin Lazarus through Tribe of Noise. I would like to thank my extremely generous and patient patrons, Pedro Reyes, Andrew Laverghetta, Ron Kleiss, and Bill Ford, for giving me the freedom to start on this wacky journey and mercilessly hurtle my opinions of obscure Midwestern cities into the uncaring internet. I hope that this summer hasn't been too boring or disconnected for a podcast which at some point now really should be about model railroading again. I hope you're starting to see why and how urbanism relates to trains and transit, and by extension modeling, but if not, you'll get a more thorough detailing in an upcoming episode. Someday. If you would like to know more, you can visit the website at www.bgtmrring.org. That's Bravo Golf Tango, Michael Romeo Romeo, Indigo November Golf, Oscar Romeo Golf, to listen to the Manifesto and Prologue series, watch the Modern Modeling Clinic anthology, or read the free-to-access Patreon production blog. And please consider donating on a monthly basis to help defer hosting and equipment costs and support what I do. Also, just to see if anybody is paying attention this late into the credits, I would like to point you in the direction of a new side project I have going, to be found at www.centercountyhighwayrevolt.org. That's center spelled the British way, or whiskey. Charlie Echo November Tango Romeo Echo Charlie Oscar Uniform November Tango Yankee Hotel Indigo Golf Hotel Whiskey Alpha Yankee Romeo Echo Victor Oscar Lima Tango Oscar Romeo Golf. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced on the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock people. I would like to thank them for their historical stewardship of central Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for listening. Keep riding trains, keep punching Nazis, and keep building a better future.